The galaxy stood at the edge of a knife, poised between fragile peace and catastrophic war. Stars burned in the distance, their light touching worlds and systems that had long forgotten the ancient conflicts of humanity. For centuries, humans had retreated to the shadows, isolated on their homeworld, content to let the galaxy forget them. Yet that self-imposed exile had been a choice, not a sign of weakness. In the quiet corners of space, humanity had rebuilt, scarred by wars that had nearly driven them to extinction. Now, as whispers of invasion spread across the galactic frontier, the old wounds of the galaxy were reopening. In the dark expanse of space, the Galactic Imperium, an ancient and bloated empire, prepared to launch their final conquest. Their fleet, composed of sleek ships bristling with advanced weaponry, stretched for miles. The Galactics were known for their technological superiority and ruthless efficiency. Their arrogance was as vast as their empire, and they saw humanity as a relic of the past, a forgotten empire that had no place in the new galactic order. On the bridge of the Galactic's flagship, Grand Admiral Varesh leaned forward, a sneer curling his lips as he studied the tactical display. "The humans have been silent for too long," he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. "They've become soft in their isolation, no longer the threat they once were." Across the galaxy on Earth, the air was heavy with tension. The once great human federation had dissolved into fragmented alliances, each territory content to manage their own affairs. But deep within the old Federation archives, the warnings had been clear. The Galactics were coming. And so, after centuries of peace, the call had gone out, summoning humanity's greatest commanders back into service. In a secluded mountain bunker, far from prying eyes, General Nathaniel Graves sat in a room lit only by the flickering glow of holographic maps. A veteran of the last war humanity had fought, Graves was a man who had seen the horrors of interstellar conflict up close. His face was lined with the weight of old battles, and his eyes burned with a cold, unyielding determination. "The galaxy has forgotten what we are capable of," Graves said, his voice low and gravelly, speaking to a room filled with silent, battle-hardened officers. "But we haven't. The call to arms had been issued, and as the ancient warships of the human fleet were pulled from their dormant state, the galaxy would soon be reminded of the ferocity and ingenuity of the human race." On the far edge of the galaxy, the Galactic's High Council convened in a room bathed in the soft glow of holographic projections. The counselors, draped in the regal attire of their empire, spoke in hushed tones, their confidence palpable. "Humans," scoffed Counselor Zara, her violet eyes narrowing in disbelief. "They haven't been a threat for centuries. Their time has passed. This will be nothing more than a minor operation." Grand Admiral Varesh nodded in agreement, the corners of his lips twitching upward in a smirk. "Their fleet is outdated. Their tactics are obsolete. We'll sweep them aside like dust in the wind." As the Galactics prepared for what they believed would be an effortless conquest, whispers of their plans spread through the galaxy. The other races, long oppressed by the Galactic's iron grip, began to panic. The Galactic's expansion had already crippled entire systems, and if humanity fell, there would be no force left capable of standing against them. Desperate for aid, a coalition of lesser races, barely more than scattered factions, sent out a plea to the humans. It was a long shot, but it was the only hope they had. Earth's response was swift but calculated. Humanity didn't rush into action. The decision to engage wasn't one of desperation. It was one of cold, precise logic. The Galactics needed to be stopped, and humans would be the ones to do it. Not for glory or power, but to restore the balance they had once fought to protect. Across hidden shipyards, the engines of massive warships hummed to life for the first time in centuries. These were not the sleek, elegant vessels of the Galactics. No, humanity's warships were something far more terrifying. Monolithic beasts of war, built with one purpose in mind: total annihilation. They had been designed in an era where survival meant wielding overwhelming power. Admiral Elise Riker stood aboard the Resolute, the flagship of humanity's fleet. Her hands were clasped behind her back as she watched the shipyards come alive with activity. Beside her, Lieutenant Marcus Keller adjusted his headset, monitoring the status of the fleet. "Are we ready, Admiral?" Keller asked. Riker's lips twitched into a grim smile. "We've been ready for centuries. It's time to remind the galaxy who we are." The fleet's activation sent a ripple through the galactic network. Humanity was on the move, and for the first time in over 100 years, the galaxy began to tremble. The void of space shimmered as the human fleet emerged from slipstream space, their hulking forms casting long shadows across the stars. The Resolute led the charge, its massive hull bristling with weapon systems that had been dormant for centuries. These ships were ancient, but their technology was far from obsolete. Human engineers had perfected the art of warfare, and these war machines were the embodiment of that perfection. Admiral Riker stood on the bridge of the Resolute, her expression stoic as she surveyed the tactical display. The Zal-6 fleet was waiting for them, their ships arranged in a tight formation, brimming with confidence. They believed they had the upper hand. They believed wrong. "Status report," Riker ordered, her voice cutting through the tension on the bridge. "All ships are in position, Admiral," Lieutenant Keller responded. "The Zal-6 fleet is holding steady, but they don't seem to have recognized the threat yet." Riker's eyes narrowed. "They will soon enough." Initiate Phase 1. Across the fleet, human warships powered up their systems, their weapons coming online with a low, ominous hum. These were no ordinary weapons. They were designed to dismantle enemy fleets with brutal efficiency, using a combination of advanced energy weaponry, high-velocity projectiles, and electromagnetic disruptors that could disable entire fleets in moments. As the human fleet advanced, the Zal-6 commanders watched with growing unease. Their initial confidence began to waver as they realized the sheer scale of the human armada. These were not the feeble remnants of a forgotten empire. They were a fully operational military force, and they were coming for blood. On the Zal-6 flagship, Grand Admiral Varesh's smirk faltered. What are they doing?" he muttered, his eyes widening as the human fleet began to break formation, executing maneuvers that defied conventional tactics. "They're splitting up," one of his officers exclaimed. "They're leaving themselves vulnerable." Varesh clenched his fists. "No, they're not. They're setting a trap." He was right. The humans weren't following traditional military doctrine. They were using tactics the Zal-6 had never encountered before. Their ships moved with precision, exploiting weaknesses in the Zal-6 formation that the aliens hadn't even known existed. The battle was about to begin. The battle began with a fury. As the human fleet approached the edge of the contested system, the Zal-6 made the first move. From their sleek, silver warships, beams of high-energy plasma shot across the void, streaking toward the advancing human ships. It was a dazzling display of raw firepower, meant to overwhelm and annihilate in a single, devastating blow. The Zal-6 fleet commander, Admiral Erix, grinned in anticipation, certain of his easy victory. To his mind, humanity was an outdated relic, a species whose best days were long behind them. The initial barrage rocked the human ships, their shields flaring as they absorbed the tremendous energy. For a moment, it appeared as though the Zal-6's superior firepower had the upper hand. Explosions danced across the hulls of the human vessels, and some ships even broke formation, reeling under the assault. Erix's confidence swelled. "Pathetic," he hissed, his voice laced with contempt. "This will be over sooner than I thought." But as the Zal-6 pounded their weapons into the human ships, something changed. The human vessels, once appearing sluggish and vulnerable, suddenly came alive. Their engines roared to life, and with a precision that stunned the Zal-6 commanders, the human ships began to maneuver in ways that defied all conventional tactics. What had once been a straightforward advance transformed into a chaotic, unpredictable storm of movement. The Resolute led the charge, its heavy armor shrugging off the last of the plasma strikes as it powered forward. Instead of returning fire immediately, the human fleet split into several formations, darting around the Zal-6 lines. They weaved between asteroid fields and debris clouds, using the environment to their advantage. It was clear now that the human commanders had no intention of engaging in a direct slugging match. They were playing a different game altogether. From the bridge of his ship, Admiral Eric's grin faded. "What is this madness?" he muttered, watching as the human ships deftly avoided the brunt of his attacks, forcing his fleet into awkward angles of pursuit. His officers scrambled, barking orders as the Zal 6 formation stretched and broke apart in their attempts to chase the nimble human vessels. "Admiral, they're using the debris field as cover," one of his tactical officers cried, pointing to the holographic display. The humans were luring the Zal 6 fleet into the asteroid belt that surrounded a nearby moon, a death trap for any ship not equipped with the right maneuvering thrusters. The first human salvo came with surgical precision. Hidden amidst the space debris, human warships opened fire, not with beams of light or flashy displays of energy, but with solid projectile weapons, mass drivers that hurled hyperdense slugs at incredible speeds. The Zal 6 had no defense against these. Their shields, designed to absorb energy blasts, were practically useless against the physical bombardment. One by one, the sleek alien vessels began to shudder and crack, their hulls breached by the kinetic strikes. Admiral Riker's voice crackled over the human fleet's comms, calm and focused. "Target their flanking ships. Break their formation." The human ships moved like wolves in a pack, tearing into the Zal 6 flank with a calculated ferocity. Every maneuver was precise, every strike deliberate. They didn't need overwhelming numbers. They had the element of surprise and, more importantly, the advantage of experience. These were commanders who had fought in the brutal wars of humanity's past. They had faced extinction before, and they had learned from it. The Zal 6 had grown complacent in their dominance, but humanity had only grown sharper in its isolation. How are they doing this? Eric's barked, slamming his fist against the console. His fleet, which moments ago had seemed invincible, was now floundering. Alien vessels that once glided through space with arrogant grace were now colliding with asteroids, their advanced targeting systems failing to lock onto the nimble human ships. In contrast, the human fleet moved as if it had rehearsed this battle 1,000 times. Admiral Riker stood on the bridge of the Resolute, her gaze cold and calculating. "Deploy the electromagnetic pulse," she ordered. A ripple of energy surged from the Resolute, spreading through the surrounding space like a wave. The Zal 6 ships, relying on their intricate digital systems, began to falter. Their targeting arrays went dark, their communications scrambled. In an instant, the sleek, high-tech warships became helpless behemoths, blind and deaf in the cold expanse of space. The humans had jammed their systems entirely, leaving the Zal 6 fleet disoriented and vulnerable. "Now!" Riker commanded. The second wave of human strikes came with devastating force. Plasma lances erupted from human ships, cutting through the weakened Zal 6 shields like a hot knife through butter. Missiles streaked through the debris field, detonating with pinpoint accuracy against exposed fuel lines and reactors. Explosions blossomed in the void as Zal 6 warships were torn apart, their once pristine hulls reduced to glowing wreckage. Admiral Eric's watched in horror as his fleet began to disintegrate around him. "This is impossible," he shouted, slamming his fists into his armrests. His flagship shuddered as a projectile ripped through one of its engines, sending the massive ship into a slow, spiraling descent. The Zal 6, who had entered the battle with such arrogance and confidence, were now facing total annihilation at the hands of a species they had long dismissed. "Admiral, we've lost control of the fleet," one of his officers screamed, panic in his voice. "We need to retreat." Eric's face twisted in rage and disbelief. Retreat? From humans? It was unthinkable. But even as he hesitated, the decision was made for him. A blinding flash lit up the view screen as a human cruiser, armed with an experimental graviton cannon, fired a concentrated beam at the Zal 6 flagship. The weapon, designed to manipulate the very fabric of gravity, caused the ship's structure to buckle and implode in on itself. In an instant, the once proud flagship was reduced to a twisted mass of debris, drifting lifelessly in space. The Zal-6 fleet crumbled. What had started as a battle of equals was now a rout. Human ships darted between the remaining alien vessels, picking them off one by one with cold precision. The aliens, overwhelmed and disoriented, had no answer to the human assault. Their arrogance had been their downfall. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. Admiral Riker, enemy fleet is in full retreat, Keller reported, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Riker nodded, her expression unreadable. Pursue them. No survivors. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. The Zal-6, who had come expecting an easy victory, had been utterly destroyed. The few surviving ships scattered into the stars, fleeing from the system with their tails between their legs. Humanity, once thought to be a forgotten relic of the past, now stood victorious, its power and resilience on full display. Admiral Riker stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring out into the void. The wreckage of the Zal-6 fleet drifted in the distance, silent and broken. There was no celebration among the humans, only the grim satisfaction of a job well done. Send a message to the Galactic Council, Riker said quietly. Tell them the Zal-6 threat has been neutralized. As the human fleet began to regroup, the galaxy would remember this day. Humanity had returned, and they were a force to be reckoned with. The battle was over, and the silence that followed felt almost as deafening as the explosions that had torn through the void moments before. Wreckage from the alien fleet drifted aimlessly through space, glittering against a backdrop of distant stars. The once proud Zal-6 armada was reduced to smoldering debris, the few surviving ships fleeing in disarray, leaving behind only a trail of shame and broken pride. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Riker stood motionless, her steely gaze fixed on the wreckage before her. Around her, the crew quietly went about their tasks, their faces somber and hard. There were no cheers, no triumphant cries. Humanity had won, but they all knew this was just the beginning. Victory here was a statement, a warning. But the war was far from over. All ships accounted for, Admiral, Keller reported, his voice subdued. Minimal casualties on our side. Riker nodded but said nothing. Her mind wasn't on the numbers or the logistics. It was on the message they had just sent to the galaxy. For too long, humanity had been forgotten, sidelined as irrelevant by the galactic powers. The Zal-6 had come expecting to stamp out an ancient, weak species. Instead, they had awakened the sleeping beast. And now, that beast was fully awake. She glanced at the main view screen, where the few surviving Zal-6 ships disappeared into the distance, tails tucked between their legs. They'll remember this day, she said quietly, almost to herself. And so will the rest of the galaxy. The humans had not been hiding out of fear or weakness. They had been waiting for the right time to reassert themselves on the galactic stage. And now, with this battle, they had done so in the most decisive way possible. Send a message to the Galactic Council, Riker ordered, her voice calm but laced with authority. Inform them that the Zal-6 incursion has been dealt with, and let them know humanity will not stand idly by while others decide the fate of this galaxy. Keller's fingers danced across the console as he relayed the message, but in the back of his mind, a grim thought lingered. They had won today, but the galaxy was vast and full of enemies. This was just the beginning of what would surely be a much larger conflict. A war was coming, one that would stretch across the stars. Meanwhile, on the Zal-6 command ship, Admiral Eric's nursed his wounds, both physical and prideful. His once immaculate uniform was torn and bloodstained, and his eyes were wild with disbelief. His fleet, his invincible armada, had been destroyed by humans. The same humans he had mocked and belittled before the battle. What have we done?" he muttered, his voice hoarse with horror. The Zal-6 had made a grave mistake. They had assumed humanity was still the primitive species from the history books, a species that had barely clawed its way into the stars. But that was no longer the case. Humanity had grown, evolved, and now they wielded weapons and tactics that defied all understanding. "They will come for us," one of his surviving officers whispered, his voice trembling. They won't stop now. Eric's closed his eyes, the full weight of their error pressing down on him. The humans hadn't just defeated them. They had humiliated them. And worse, they had sent a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity was back, and they were not to be trifled with. Back aboard the Resolute, Riker stood in the dim light of the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back. Her expression remained unreadable, but there was a fire in her eyes, a cold, unyielding determination. "They underestimated us once," she said softly, her voice carrying a warning to anyone listening. "They won't live long enough to make that mistake again." As the human fleet began to move out of the debris field, engines glowing with the promise of more battles to come, the galaxy would indeed remember this day. A storm was brewing, and at its heart stood humanity, dominant, resolute, and ready to claim its place among the stars once more. And the galaxy would soon learn that when humanity returned to the battlefield, they didn't just fight to win, they fought to conquer.